again. I am suffering from a cold this week, so I apologize for the sound of my voice and the delay in this video. It came upon me rather suddenly and it still hasn't gone away. But I did want to put up this short video and share a few things with you. One of the things I wanted to highlight was a few things that I pulled off of my shelves, and as you can sort of see in the background, I have quite a number of things on my shelf. One of the things that has been very important to me over the years has been my Jewish studies collection, and I literally have 400 or 500 books in that area. So selecting a few to share with you is quite a task. But if you have specific questions about different areas, let me know, and I will see about recommending some resources for you. One of my favorite books in the entire world is actually Abraham Heschel's book on the prophets. It talks about the prophets in the Bible, but it talks about them historically, culturally, and also tries to apply them to modern day circumstances. And here we're not talking about sort of end time prophecies of doom, 2012 and the end of the Mayan calendar and all that sort of stuff. But prophets really were looking to change the world in which they lived. And this is the book for that. The prophets really looked for an end to injustice, an end to poverty, an end to people doing the wrong things in the world. And Abraham Heschel, Rabbi Heschel, goes through the prophets, mostly the minor prophets of the Old Testament, the Hebrew scriptures, and looks at how they can apply today. So it's actually a 2-volume set in most of its publications, and it's very, very worthwhile. He goes through specifically the different prophets. So you get prophets of Amos and Obadiah, and also the major prophets like Jeremiah and Isaiah. But we also get history and justice and different elements of ethics involved in prophecy as well. So I recommend that one. There are quite a number of books that are put out by the Schocken book series. One is The Essence of Judaism. This one is The Story of Judaism. If you have a more philosophical bent, there's one on the philosophies of Judaism. There's one I think that I've also pulled out from my shelf called The World of the Talmud by Morris Adler. These are good, accessible texts which have quite a lot of history, quite a lot of authority behind them. They're very readable, and I recommend almost all of them highly. I've not encountered one that I really wouldn't recommend, but I don't want to give a blanket recommendation just for the series, except Schocken books tends to be very good in the Jewish studies area. Jacob Neusner is a person that we're using otherwise. He has put out quite a number of things. If you are interested in the development of Rabbinic Judaism in particular, and what we are living with today is Rabbinic Judaism, post-Temple Judaism, he has a book specifically on this, which talks about the development out of the post-Temple period. You'll find how Judaism went from being a religion primarily of practice centered around the temple and around a particular place to around a set of teachings and a set of books, but it's still very much a system of practice rather than just reading and understanding and belief. And Neusner's book on Rabbinic Judaism is very good for that. Of course, we're using his other book, The Basics of Judaism, in various courses at APUS, so I recommend that. There is a book by Nickelsburg and Stone called Faith and Piety in Early Judaism. And what this does is it looks at Judaism before, during, and a little bit after what we would call the New Testament period. And we look at different stories. For instance, there are Samaritan Chronicles here. Samaritans are a group that still exists to this day in the Middle East. They have their own Torah, they have their own culture. They are very, very similar to the Jewish tradition, and in fact they don't see themselves as necessarily being apart from the Jewish tradition. There are different groups in here that look at the cultic practices. There are different documents in here that look at systems of belief as well as eschatology. So I think this is a good book that I can recommend. John Levinson wrote this book that we used in my seminary called Sinai and Zion. And what it does is it looks at the two main traditions that develop into Judaism today, and two main traditions that we also look at from a Christian perspective back into what we call the Old Testament. One is a system that's centered around being around the Exodus story, the people and Moses and the Ten Commandments and the formulation of the law. And the other is centered around the temple and being a people in Jerusalem and being a people in the Promised Land. And this book looks at those two main traditions that sometimes live together, sometimes live in tension, both in the Bible as well as in its application in the real world. And then there is a series by the Paulist Press called The Classics of Western Spirituality, and one of the books they have in that series is called Rabbinic Stories. And rabbinic stories can be parables, can be short stories, can be biblical images, can be Talmudic or Mishnaic kinds of things, and I invite you to look up this book as well. I hope you're having a good time looking at the different things that are in early Judaism. We sort of go very quickly through the history of Judaism in this class because the focus really is on modern and contemporary Judaism. But you can't understand that really all that well unless you get some of the background. And for some people, surprisingly in our world, there is basically no background. So I try to cover that in our class a little bit. If you have any questions, please put them on the discussion board in terms of content so that other students, in addition to your professor, can see who is asking what, and we can answer them for the good of the whole. On the other side, if you have any questions about procedures or dates or anything like that, I know some of you have been emailing me. Thank you for that, and please continue to do so. Thanks.